My name's Kevin. I'm Japanese, Korean, Canadian. So my dad's Japanese, my mom's Korean, born and raised in Canada, and I work as a pastor at a church.
So, what's your favorite traditional dish and why?
My favorite traditional dish. So I identify mostly with my Japanese heritage. So there's a dish called ramen. It's pretty popular in Toronto as well. Basically, Chinese style noodles in like super broth, and yeah, it's just one of my favorite dishes because there's so many different kinds of ramen that you can even find in Toronto. But in Japan, each region of Japan would have its own special kind of ramen, and so I like trying different varieties. And it's kind of like comfort food for me. I don't know. It's just any given day, I could eat a bowl of ramen. I'd be fine and happy.
Can you share a memorable cultural tradition that you love?
Yeah, cultural tradition. Whenever I visit Japan, one of my favorite activities, I guess it's a cultural tradition, is going to the natural hot spring baths. So, Japan and different regions have these hot spring baths, and yeah, it's a place where you go, you unwind, you get into this like hot bath. Um, you're in your birthday suit, so anyways, but yeah, it's just great to be able to just soak in the bath, and after a long day, it's just a great way to relax. I find that it's also a place where community gathers. So after you take a bath, you go to these rooms, and there's usually lounge chairs, and you get like cold drinks and some snack food, and you're just chatting with all the people in the neighborhood, which is kind of cool. So yeah.
What's the most interesting cultural myth or legend that you know?
Cultural legend. So I like samurai stories. That's kind of like my thing. So there's one fairly well-known story called the story of the 47 Ronin. And Ronin are basically samurais without a master, right? And there's a story that's pretty well known. Most Japanese people know about it. It's a true story. It's based on a true story. And this is way back in the Tokugawa period. There is uh, the emperor sent these three envoys to Edo, which was the seat of the shogunate. So the shogunate, or the shogun, was basically the highest ranking military official, ruled all over Japan. And so this emperor sent these three envoys to Edo. And upon arrival, these envoys met with the bakufu, or the shogunate, and they realized that they didn't really have the the court etiquette, and so he assigned one of his high military officials named Kira to train them in the ways of court etiquette. And so there was an interaction there, and two of the envoys, according to the story, gave gifts that were pleasing to Kira. So Kira was able to, they said, yeah, I'm going to train you, and all that. Everything went well. But one of the envoys, he's a daimyo, which is a military general, gave the gift, but Kira felt that it was sort of more of a token gift, so it wasn't really a significant gift. And because of that, as the story goes, he actually treated this daimyo, which is named Asano, quite harshly, like picked on him and gave him a hard time. And in retaliation, Asano, I guess he didn't feel good about that interaction. On one of the occasions, drew out his sword and tried to attack Kira, and managed to, scar him, injure him. And in those days, to draw a sword in a court, and especially in the presence of, high-ranking military officials, was seen as, you're breaking the law at that point, right? So the shogun at that time ordered Asano to commit seppuku, which basically is self-disembowelment. So he had to sit down and do his thing. So Asano had a number of samurai in his employ, and 47 of them decided, instead of following the master to death, which is traditional, that's what you're supposed to do. So if the daimyo dies, the soldiers or the samurai under him are supposed to actually follow him in death. But 47 of them instead vowed revenge. They were like, I want to get revenge for my master for him being dishonored. And so they decided to enact this secret plot. So over the course of, I think, 2 years, they made up, they plotted revenge against their former master, who was now, of course, deceased. So they split up. They were hidden in different communities, and even working for other daimyos. And they decided on one night, I think it was in winter one night, they decided they would actually raid Kira's castle. So they did that successfully. They managed to kill most of the guards, and eventually beheaded Kira. Now, of course, the shogun knew about this. He found out that one of his high-ranking military officials had died in the hands of these 47 Ronin. So he ordered that all 47 of them also commit seppuku, which they did willingly. And
Right.
So, yeah, I like the story because it really embodies some of the cultural values back in those times. Things like, honor. You honor your master. You follow your master into death. Of course, these 47 wanted to honor their master by avenging him and avenging his death. There's of course, Bushido, which is translated to the way of the warrior or the code of the warrior, and so the way they would, honor, I guess, the Tokugawa shogunate or shogun by, by going ahead with the seppuku, all 47 of them at the same time, just shows that we honor that code, and so we will die like warriors.
What's one misconception about your heritage that you'd like to debunk?
Misconception. Something I experienced when one of my first trips to Japan. I was getting to know my relatives and made some new friends when I went to visit. I remember one of the things I noticed was in those interactions, people I met seemed withdrawn and shy, right? So I guess I'm used to here in North America, when you have an opinion or you have something you want to share, you say it, like, hey, like, how about those Blue Jays, man? They played a horrible game last night, whatever. You share your opinions, your thoughts. You're pretty out, I was like, explicitly share, your thoughts with others. But I found that when I was interacting with people in Japan, to me, they seemed shy and withdrawn, and that was sort of a general perception that I had. And it wasn't until later I realized that it's customary. I guess it's typical for Japanese people to actually withhold their true thoughts or emotions, and you won't actually get to know those true thoughts or emotions until you get to know them. So you really have to go through either time spent with the other person, or you really have to get to know the other person before they're able to share what they really think, or what they are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. So I guess the misconception is Japanese people are all shy, they're all withdrawn, they're all introverted, and that's actually a misconception. I think because of the social norms in Japan, you really need to focus on building a relationship of trust. And once they feel like they can trust you, then they start sharing what they really think, what they really feel. That's something I've experienced.
Yes. Can you share a fond memory from your upbringing that highlights your heritage?
So when I was young, our family used to go to these, I don't know if there's a winter festival. We used to go to these spring and summer festivals, and they were held at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center down near Don Valley Parkway in Eglinton. And so we go to these festivals, and it's held in this cultural center, and you have all these tables lined up with all sorts of different festival foods. You have games for kids. You'd have all these demonstrations like Japanese traditional dances, martial arts, which I enjoy watching as well, and tea ceremony demonstrations. So we go there, make a day out of it, have all this food, play the games, watch the demonstrations, and it's just a great way to just celebrate Japanese culture. It was always a learning experience, being able to learn about Japanese culture through these festivals. And it was a great way to introduce Japanese culture to other people as well, and to invite people into those festivities and celebrations. So it was really just really community oriented events, fun, and we see that yearly as a family.
What's one thing you wish more people knew about your culture?
Okay, here's something. So I mentioned earlier about ramen, right? So you think about ramen, and most people think there's only one kind of ramen, right? I'm just using this as an example. But as mentioned, even with something like ramen, which is a very simple noodle soup kind of dish, different regions of Japan would have their own version of it, and they're quite distinct from one another. And what maybe some people don't know about Japan is that Japan, though it is a very small country, each one of the prefectures or regions of Japan has its own distinct, almost culture. You would have things like different dialects of Japanese being spoken in different areas of Japan. It's also reflected in the foods, the arts, and general culture in those areas as well. So Japan is actually quite diverse. Depending, where you are, you get different experiences of culture. I think that's something cool that I wish more people knew about Japan. So instead of just, Japan's all the same all around, actually each region of Japan is quite different from the other. Even from my own heritage. So my dad is actually Okinawan. So he's from Okinawa. And Okinawan culture is I think it's vastly different from culture that you would experience in mainland Japan. That's just one example, right? So Okinawan culture, island culture, food, arts, everything's quite distinct. Still part of the overall Japanese culture, but very distinct from other parts of Japan and their culture. So,
If you could travel back in time to any period in Asian history, which one would it be?
I love samurai stories and all that. So I would say either the Sengoku period, which is the Warring States period, and during that time, a lot of political instability. People were battling each other. Daimyos were they fight against other daimyos. It was just basically like just everyone out to get everyone else, right? It'd be cool to kind of witness that, maybe from a safe distance, not get involved in people like slashing each other with swords. Or the period after that, which is called known as the Edo period. And in the Edo period, we had a Tokugawa Ieyasu, which is a famous shogun, managed to unite the warring states and was able to bring political and military stability to the whole country. And so during that period, because everyone, well, most people felt safe, there's stability, there was quite a proliferation of arts and culture. So it was during that period where you had a lot of famous traditional Japanese artists make their mark in the world. And you had different forms of art that just really flourished during those times. So it'd be cool to see that as well. Um, Hard to pick and choose, but either Sengoku or Edo period.
Who's a notable figure from your cultural background who has inspired you and why?
I mentioned Tokugawa Ieyasu. So he managed to, during the Edo period, bring political stability to all of Japan, and not an easy feat. If you imagine, different warlords, vying for power, they're trying to, outmaneuver one another, outwit one another, and literally try to kill each other off. But somehow through, I guess, Ieyasu's, he was known as a strategic planner. He had a sense of vision, of course, uniting Japan. But very strategic. He was known as a very strategic ruler. So he brought that element into it, but also just generally in terms of the way that he was able to command his forces quite well, was able to bring unity to Japan. And yeah, I admired that part about him, just to have that vision to bring unity to Japan. Not saying he's a perfect person. He has his flaws, of course, and there's things about him that really don't shed a positive light on him, but. Generally, his sense of vision, his usage of military strategy, his gift of being able to see the bigger picture, right, and not just think about his own interests and his own needs, but really trying to see the needs of the entire country and bringing unity to the entire country of Japan. I thought it was pretty cool. So,
can you describe a place in Canada where you feel a strong connection to your roots?
Yeah, definitely. So. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to visit Stevenston, BC. So it's just on the south side of Richmond, and right by the waterfront. And it was a fishing community. And so in this fishing community, I can't remember when Japanese immigrants first settled there, but before the war, World War II, it actually grew into becoming quite a significant fishing community. And so a lot of Japanese immigrants would, move there. They would, start their fishing and be involved in the fishing community and the businesses there. And so the community really built up to a significant number. I think at one point they were saying that about 2/3 of the population of Stevenston was Japanese heritage. And of course the war came, and once that happened, of course, the government forced the Japanese immigrants who had immigrated and settled there to move to internment camps. So they were forced to leave their land, their homes, their boats, fishing assets, pretty much, all the assets and things they had to leave them behind, and they were forced to go to these internment camps. Of course, the war ended a number of years afterwards, and then a few years after that, they were allowed. Some of them were allowed to, return back to the communities of Stevenston. And when they returned, they realized that the land that they had previously owned was sold off. The boats they had were all sold off. Basically, came back to Stevenston with nothing. Everything that they had prior to the internment camps was, sold off by the government. And but what was really interesting, encouraging for me, was to hear the stories of how some of the people who came back, they didn't give up. They actually decided, they knew this was their home, and so they almost it's like a resettling there. So they went back, started with nothing, and started getting back into the community and building up that community again. And actually, there are stories of former residents of Stevenston who went to internment camps coming back to Stevenston and making it their home again. And so they really showed, I think, a lot of courage, a lot of perseverance, and just resolve to, say that this is our home. We want to make it our home. We want to contribute to the community. We want this to be a place where we can, raise our families and build up the community again. So I was really encouraged by that. I was really inspired by that. At the same time, though, I realized, listening to some of these stories and reading about some of the stories of people that have gone through those, painful, situations, being forced away from home and coming back to nothing, made me realize that, when we think about these kinds of stories, atrocities that took place in different people in different periods of history, I think the stories that people tell and people share are important because it reminds us of how we can learn from those experiences, right? So one of my big things takeaways from that experience, just even, visiting Stevenston and hearing the stories and reading the stories, is to make sure that, I think it's important for us to continue to share these stories so that other people can learn, and myself learn to never repeat, these mistakes again, and to learn from that. Um, yeah, so that really made a deep impact in my life.
Right. So, what's a saying or quote that you grew up with?
So I'm not sure who taught me this, but one of my parents taught me to say in Japanese, it's "nana korobi ya oki," and that translates to 7 times falling down, on the eighth you stand up or get up. Basically means that you might fail and fall many times, but on the eighth try, or the last time, you'll get up. And it's basically a saying that you know it's a demonstration of perseverance. It means you continue to persevere. It doesn't matter how many times you fall, but what matters is how you get up, right? And that's really what's important. I think about even people in Stevenson, who were forced away from their homes, giving up everything, coming back to nothing. They could have just given up, moved to different communities, moved away somewhere else, or just given up on everything. But instead, they had the resolve to rebuild their communities, rebuild that community. So it's really, I think, a demonstration of that spirit of perseverance. Pushing through tragedies, pushing through suffering, pushing through difficult circumstances to really persevere through that. And I think about 2011, of course, the earthquake, tsunami, and the nuclear disaster in Japan. I visited Japan soon after that, summer after, so that was summer of 2011, and I got to see these communities that were affected by the tsunami, and met some of the people who were invested in rebuilding some of these towns and villages that were just absolutely decimated by the tsunami. Right? And you hear these stories, and they're sharing these stories of loss. They're sharing these stories of grief. They're sharing the stories of losing loved ones, losing homes, losing everything for some people. But a common thread in most of these stories I heard was this spirit of perseverance. There's like this drive that they really wanted to unite to make their communities better, stronger. And it was just an encouraging, experience to be able to hear these stories of loss. At the same time, as I mentioned, people are sharing about this idea that they wanted to, push through these painful circumstances and the painful history of what's taken place. And even in the midst of loss, they want to make something new again together. And that really, demonstrated to me, like, this is what perseverance should look like, right? Even for myself, I think about my own parents, and they immigrated to Canada in the 70s, and they really didn't know the language. They really didn't know the culture. It was foreign to them. It was the first time in Canada. And some of the stories they shared were quite eye-opening. Being in a new place, new land, new culture, new language, everything, trying to start something, start family, start, getting involved in the community, even like, starting a livelihood. And they pushed through all sorts of struggles, and they really did persevere through those difficult times. And I see where they are right now, and see how much of a difference it made for my sister and I, how they really, suffered and went through those difficult circumstances, but because they had the spirit of perseverance, were able to make a better life for my sister and I. And I think about that, and I know that my words can't express how thankful I am that my parents were willing to go through all that. And for me, it's a lesson to, I need to learn to persevere as well, not let challenges and difficult circumstances, force me down, force me to stay down. As I mentioned, that saying, what's important is how you get up, right? And that's a value I want to continue to live out in my life. I want to try to teach that value to my kids as well, and people around me, friends, family. I think it's an important value lesson for all of us, the spirit of perseverance.
What traditions from your heritage do you want to pass on to your friends and family?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the other question about the tradition, or I'd say like the value of perseverance. And um, the world's not an easy place to live in. And I think when you think about challenges that our children face these days, they're going through their own sets of challenges, right? It doesn't matter where you are, where you live. And I think it's an important value to take on, that no matter what life throws against you, that you're willing to persevere, you're willing to, not give up, to keep trying, keep aspiring for new heights or higher heights, and new goals and new opportunities, and just kind of, push through or persevere through these difficult circumstances to get where you want to be. So I'm hoping that my kids would be, resilient, that they'd also have that, embody that spirit of perseverance, to be willing to, never give up and to keep trying. I think that's an important lesson. Can I share a silly answer to that question?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So I wrote this in my notes, but one of the things I noticed in Japan, if you've ever been to Japan, you go to some place like Tokyo, whatever, um, you'll never find enough garbage cans. And when I first noticed that, I was confused. So you go to a convenience store, you buy food, food wrappers, whatever, bottles for drinks, and there's nowhere to throw them in. At the convenience stores, they have their own garbage cans and whatever, but on the streets or parks, for example, even stations, right, it's hard to find garbage cans or receptacles. And so you're always carrying out this garbage. And, I got annoyed when I first experienced that. So I was talking to, my friends in Japan. They explained to me that that's actually intentional, and it reflects a value that they have, which is the ownership of your own garbage. And I don't sound silly. What does that mean, ownership of your own garbage? So they value, or I guess they have a value in their culture, that whatever waste you produce, you have ownership over it. So if you drink, Coca-Cola or whatever, and you have the bottle, that empty bottle is something you're responsible for. So you don't just throw it in some trash receptacle. You don't throw it in someone's yard. You don't dump it in someone's, front yard or any of that, because of course that's, you're actually like neglecting your ownership over that piece of garbage. So they actually commonly hold onto that garbage and they would take it home, and then they would actually dispose of it in their own garbage cans. Or of course, if you drink something or buy something in a convenience store, they have their own garbage cans there. Kind of a silly answer to the question, but ownership of garbage, I think, really is important. Right? When we think about waste, we think, well, as long as it's out of sight, out of mind, it's someone else's problem, right? I'm going to use this product and I have all this waste. I'm just going to chuck it in the garbage can, out of sight, out of mind. The city will deal with it, right? It's someone else's problem. It's not my trash. It's, you don't worry about it. You don't think about it. But I think it's important for us to understand when we think about, caring for the places we live in, caring for our communities, caring for our homes, caring for the environment. It's our responsibility, right? It's not the city's responsibility. It's not, the government's responsibility. It's primarily our responsibility. It starts with us. So I'd like to teach or uphold or teach that value in our family as well. So even with the kids, I keep telling them, if you have any trash, you could throw it in the trash can, and if that's the very least you could do. Don't drop it on the ground. Don't throw it away somewhere. At least go to a trash can and throw it in. But if you can, bring it home. So put it in your backpack, bring it home, and then we'll dispose of it. We'll sort through the recycling, whatever. But let's take ownership of the waste that we produce. And I think that practice, ideally would start to make a difference, at least in our own home, but maybe through the communities that we're a part of or in the communities that we live in. It's like a change of perspective, way of thinking, right? It's like, no, this is my garbage, so I'm gonna take ownership of that, and I'm gonna be responsible for even the trash that I create, the waste that I create, right? Yeah.